Hi, Weather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Wednesday, October 5th. Hurricane Matthew is now located over the Bahama Island chain, turning northwest. It looks like it'll continue on a northwest track over the next several hours thanks to an expanding ridge over the central part of the Atlantic Ocean. That kind of a track will bring it towards the east central coast of Florida over the next couple of days. It looks like it could make landfall in east central Florida or just skirt the coast, probably as a major hurricane. It's still a major hurricane, category 3. It certainly weakened quite a bit after its encounter with the land masses of Haiti and Cuba. Even though it was over the water, part of that time the central pressure rose some 30 millibars, which is pretty significant and certainly good news, but again, it still has maximum sustained winds of 115 miles per hour and classified as a category 3. This is the latest National Hurricane Center depiction of the tropical Atlantic right now. Matthew right here, again, it crossed right over the western tip of Haiti right here, and then the eastern tip of Cuba right there, and is now moving officially at north-northwest. It will become basically true northwest over the next several hours and head right through the Bahama Island chain and eventually end up right around east central Florida. Whether it actually comes inland a little bit, it's still a little bit uncertain, but nonetheless it should be hurricane type conditions in east central Florida along the coastline. Then it looks like it'll gradually parallel the coast for a while, continue near the South Carolina coastline, and then basically get kind of driven to a halt on its northward extent, starts to turn to the north and east. And at that time, a strong trough will be approaching from the west, prevent it from coming up the east coast, and in fact, eventually looks like it loops back around to the southeast, and ultimately, we could be dealing with this system a week to 10 days from now, and ultimately could actually hit Florida or the Bahamas again if it makes this kind of a loop. This is rare, but it's not totally unprecedented. There certainly have been looping type tropical systems before. Part of the interaction with Nicole here, which is now an official tropical storm, this stays out in this part of the Atlantic, but there will be kind of an interaction between Matthew and Nicole, and that also could contribute to a looping back around. Bottom line, up in the mid-Atlantic region is little, if any, impact from Matthew this weekend. There could very well be some shower activity associated with that trough moving to the east. Basically, we'll have a strong cold frontal passage over the weekend, causing some shower activity on Saturday night, probably clearing out around here for Sunday, and quite cool. Highs on Sunday in the low to mid-60s. So of immediate concern, the Bahama Island chain, and then east central Florida, all the way up the coastline, Georgia, South Carolina. Still could be an important impact in places like northeastern Florida, eastern Georgia, southeastern South Carolina along the coastline. In fact, the European model from last night still dumps a foot of rain on Charleston, for example. So certainly no reason to let your guard down in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, or North Carolina, but can breathe a sigh of relief up here in the Mid-Atlantic region and the Northeast. Well, here are the latest frames of a colorized infrared satellite imagery loop from the Penn State Ewald site. Again, yesterday morning, Matthew had a quite distinct eye as it approached the western tip of Haiti right here. That eye became obscured after the passage over that land area on the western tip of Haiti. Then it moved back out over the water and over the eastern tip of Cuba. And again, earlier this morning, the eye was relatively obscured. Now it's starting to show some signs of perhaps the last couple of frames here, an eye starting to reform again. It's basically out over the water. Its influence by Cuba is diminishing now, so it could pick up a little strength over the next day or two as it treks to the north and west, right through the Bahama Island chain, on its way towards what likely will be right around the east central coast of Florida in a couple of days. Well, let's just walk through the entire GFS run from last night to show this quite amazing loop that Matthew looks like it'll take. Here it goes, moving northwest right through the Bahama Island chain. Again, this is from last night's 0Z GFS model run. Then it approaches and perhaps even makes a little bit of landfall here east central Florida and pretty much rides up parallel to the coast along the northeast side of Florida, right near the coastal area of Georgia and South Carolina. Again, the European model is pretty much doing the same sort of track here. And meanwhile, a trough with a frontal system pushes through the mid-Atlantic region, basically stops the northward movement of Matthew, turns to the northeast, and then eventually loops back around to the southeast. And again, we could be dealing with this system a week to 10 days from now, and ultimately could actually loop back around right over the Bahama Island chain and perhaps even hit Florida for a second time. So quite an amazing loop here, projected by many of the models now in the overnight runs. And in fact, GFS has it becoming quite strong, and then finally riding off the coast in about 10 days from now. So quite an amazing pattern. We'll kind of walk through this once again. Here it is right now over the southeastern Bahamas. It'll continue to move to the northwest as a ridge over the central Atlantic continues to expand to the west, and the steering currents around that high clockwise will push this system to the northwest over the next couple of days. Again, it could make landfall right around east central Florida. Now, we haven't had a major hurricane strike U.S. soil since October of 2005, which was Wilma, late October 2005. That streak without a major hurricane is unprecedented in the record-keeping year since about the middle 1800s. This could break that streak. It's a close call whether it'll be a 3, and it's a close call whether or not it'll actually come inland. But it grinds to a halt in its northward extent and then starts looping back around again. The European model has a similar type of loop here, and again, it could then come back around and hit Bahamas and Florida once again in a week to 10 days from now. Well, I thought we'd show the water vapor imagery loop. This is using GOES data, and it's put on a channel that shows us water vapor. The orange area represents dry air masses, and where you see color, whites and blues represent moist air masses. First of all, down here, all this water vapor, all this moisture is associated with Matthew. Again, it's now around the southeastern side of the Bahama Island chain, headed to the north and west. Meanwhile, farther east, this moist air mass and a little spin in the atmosphere right here is associated with Tropical Storm Nicole. That stays out over the water, but it certainly interacts with Matthew at some point, and between the two of them, they kind of do a dance around each other, and that also will help to loop Matthew back around. Once it's off the North Carolina coast, it will start turning back around to the south and east, and eventually could return to the Bahamas and eastern Florida in about a week to 10 days. But out in the west, here's a major player here. We've talked about this for the last several days. A deep spin in the atmosphere here, deep upper level trough. Frontal system now moving into the central plains. This trough continues to progress to the east. It'll basically result in a strong frontal passage here over the weekend. That frontal system likely to cause showers. Matthew likely to have little, if any, impact this far north. The entire mid-Atlantic region and northeast for now certainly can breathe a sigh of relief, as it looks like this will come no farther north than the latitude of around North Carolina or so before Matthew starts to loop back around. But again, this key player here is steadily moving eastward, and that in combination with the high pressure ridge over the central Atlantic and Tropical Storm Nicole will inhibit any progression up the east coast by Matthew, and in fact will help to force it to loop back around. So kind of an interesting situation here. Again, Florida right now certainly should be preparing for a possible landfall. If not a landfall, it'll certainly have an impact on the east coast, let's say central east coast of Florida, up the northeast coast of Florida, and then eastern Georgia and the coastal area of South Carolina and southeastern North Carolina before it's forced out to sea and then loops back around. That's it for now. For VencoreWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.